How many of you out there are stuck with habits, behaviors, or certain pattern in your life, and you're wondering, why in the world can I not just break out of this? You're confused, you don't know what's going on with you, and you've admitted to believe that's just the way you are. Well, before habits, before behaviors, before patterns comes your brain. And today we are going to dissect just how the brain affect those areas of our life here with Lisa. Hello everyone, welcome to the Proverbial Minds. It is your host again, Samuel, and today with me is Lisa. Lisa, could you introduce yourself to us and share
Sure. My name's
about you?
Lisa Rigel. I am an author, a speaker. I work with companies and schools as a consultant to help them make transformative changes. And I was a teacher for 9 years, and then I was an administrator. I did my doctoral work at Ohio State in leadership, and I was really focused more on the people side of leadership as opposed to the policy side. Policies shape change, but people make change.
Right.
And so I'd been doing consulting for, since 2008. And then about 5 years ago, I really started thinking, real change starts in the brain. So we need to understand how our brain creates habits, how we think, how perceptions are formed, because at the end of the day, a lot of the practices that we have, I can teach you a practice, but if you don't understand people, then it falls flat. So I've been working with schools. I've written a couple books, and I'm helping them to understand the brain science and align that with the human system.
That's fantastic. So today, guys, we are going to be discussing with you about rewiring your brain, your mind, how your brain affects your behavior, patterns, and results in your life. So if you're here for the first time, do not hesitate to subscribe, hit the notification button so that you can be notified whenever we post new videos. And we're going to get right into it. Lisa, today I have come to you with a couple of questions, and these questions are what are going to guide our conversation as I've written them down in layers. That way we can just get to them one after the other. So, my first question for you today is, many people do not understand the great impact of the brain and how it actually is the central control unit of every function in our body and our lives. Could you share briefly how does the brain actually affect our daily actions? What is the connection between the brain and our daily lives?
Sure. So I think it starts by understanding how the brain perceives reality. So we have a area of our brain below our nose is our limbic system. 80% of the traffic in our brain happens in that limbic system. And when we think about who we are, our character, our morals, our behaviors, our thoughts, our reasoning, that's all happening up here in the conscious part of the brain. So a lot of the emotional pieces and how we perceive reality happen unconsciously. So it starts with the thalamus in the brain, which is in that limbic system. And its job is to kind of be the data manager. So as you're sitting in a room or having, at an event, it's taking in all of the sensory information. And then it goes into your amygdala, which is also in that unconscious part of your brain. And it looks for associations between now feels like then. And so it in that sensory memory center, we have lots and lots of like filters and files. And I always use the example of like a strainer, like that you strain spaghetti in. So those filters have, everything passes through them. Well, just like in a strainer, if you have a banana and you pass that through the strainer, it's still a banana, but it doesn't look like a banana. So you have your perception is the result and your reality is the original banana. So you and I can be at the exact same experience or event, and we can have a completely different reaction to it based on how our brain has associated sensory memories. It's kind of like why if you ever sell your house, your realtor tells you to put a like cookie candle or something that will smell like home, because then you walk in the house and your body relaxes. So all of this is unconscious. You're not walking in going, oh, I smell cookies. Cookies make me feel good, so I'm going to buy this house. It's all unconscious. So a lot of our behaviors stem from, we think of like our past is our past, but really our past is our present. And so the first thing to really understanding how your brain is perceiving things is to get in touch with what are the things that dysregulate your body, or what are the things that make you feel really happy and satisfied, and trying to pinpoint how has your brain associated to things. And I'll give you a really quick concrete example. I hate being late. I get a lot of anxiety around lateness. And I know that the reason that I have that reaction, because some people it doesn't bother them at all. For me, when I was a little kid, my parents were divorced, and I spent a lot of time sitting on the stoop waiting for my dad because he was always late. And so, what my brain associated between lateness was lateness and worth, or lateness and love, or lateness and respect. So, when someone's late, I end up getting anxious, or if I'm late, I'm super anxious. So now by understanding that, I can be reactive. So if someone's running late, this part of my brain, the part that reasons and thinks and is me, can tell my limbic system, hey, this is not that. What's going on right now has nothing to do with you. And then I can also be proactive. And so I always laugh with my clients. I'm like, if I'm not there 15 minutes early, I'm in a ditch somewhere, because I'm always early, because I know for my own sense of peace and calm, I need to be there early so I don't end up having anxiety about being late.
That's interesting. So that tells me now that everything I do every day is based off of stored systems, interpretations of senses and my environment that I have stored based off of past experiences.
Yep.
So what I see might not be actually what it is. It might just be based on the interpretation I give to it.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I think people think of, we think of our brain as like it's just one thing and that it's us. But the reality is only about this part, just about 20% of our brain is really where we are. The rest of it's an animal brain that we share with other animals. And the purpose of that lower brain is just to keep us alive. And so when we think about why we're doing things, we have to think about how our brain is storing moment to moment, and it's tied to our emotions. So the first memory center is that sensory memory center, and it's present when we're born. We don't even create episodic memories until we're like two. And then we're starting to be able to tell a story. But what people oftentimes think is our memories are stored like a giant library, and you just go in the card catalog and pull it out and read it. But that's not how they're stored. Our brain actually stores pieces of memories in multiple locations. So when we want to make a semantic meaning and out of our experiences, it requires us, that prefrontal cortex, to go into the striatum and the amygdala and all different parts of our brain, pull those details up, and then think about them and make meaning out of them. And so when we're thinking about behavior, all that unconscious stuff is happening in the limbic part of our brain. And so we are not thinking about that. So
Right.
we can't blame ourselves for feeling a certain way. The better way to approach it is to dig in and be an investigator. Why am I feeling this way? And is it justified? Or do I need to rewrite my story? And at that point, then this part of your brain can train the limbic system to say, this is not that. So we're not going to have that same reaction.
That's amazing. My next question now is, I've learned a lot about neuroplasticity, which is the fact that you can retrain your brain, you can retrain your mind to function in a certain way, which you have already laid the groundwork for that. Because the ability for you to retrain your limbic brain to change the way it perceives things shows that the brain it can be retrained and can be rewired or reoriented about certain events and experiences. How does neuroplasticity correlate with perceptions, how we perceive things? How are these things formed? What does neuroplasticity how to do with it? So basically, if someone now is on the other side of this screen, don't have any idea what neuroplasticity is, How can they understand? How can you get them to understand that? And how does it shape perceptions, which eventually shape habits?
Right, exactly. So that's the beautiful thing about our brain is that we have a lot of control. So again, we exist up here, and I call that kind of the CEO of our brain.
Right.
And just like in a CEO's office, they don't go into the HR department and do their jobs. They don't
Right.
go into the sales department. They just make sure all those departments are functioning well. So if you recognize I have perceptions that are shaded by things I don't want them shaded by anymore, then your CEO can send messages to the limbic system and it can add more filters. You can never take away your past experiences. They're there. But I always say the solution to pollution is dilution.
Right.
So if you are positive and you're looking at things and you're self-talking, you go into an event and you're like, this is how it's going to be, this is how we're going to feel about it, and you're telling your brain that, then eventually what happens is that the thalamus will go into those sensory memories, still pull the negative associations, but now also pulling positive. And so now it's confused. So it sends the message to your security center that says, hey, I don't know how we should feel about this. You might want to just tap on the panic button. When your security system, which is in your amygdala, just taps on that button, it immediately sends a message up to you, to the boss of your brain, and says, hey, we're not so sure. So why don't you reason your way through this and tell us how you want us to respond? Versus if you're not completely unaware, then and your limbic system is running how you feel without your thoughts and contributing to that, then your security monitor can just wail on that button. And at that point, your body goes into survival mode and says, hey, CEO, we're in danger. So just go get a cup of coffee or something. We're going to take care of this and make sure that you're okay. And then we'll call you back. And so that plasticity is really about saying, I am going to be the designer of how those file filters go so that I can change the way I perceive. And I have a example of that. If you have two identical twins and they have the exact same day, and you have one who has negative filters in their thalamus. You say, how was your day? They'd say it's horrible. Woke up late. I was running late. I ran into the office and then I spilled coffee all over the floor. I ruined my shirt and I was late to a meeting and I never got caught up. You ask the same question to the other twin, and maybe that twin has a positive confirmation bias, and that twin will say, well, it started out rough because I was late and I got to pick all my stuff up and wipe my shirt because I ruined my shirt, and my teammates were super nice about me being late. So rough in the beginning, but then it was fine. And so that's an example of how that positive, you can make your brain do that. And then in the negative, our brain is trying to confirm those biases. So if I think the world is dangerous and people are mean and that nobody's going to be nice to me, my brain is programmed to look for examples that confirm that.
Right.
So I'm going to notice the jerk. Where if I am programming my brain to say the world is kind and people are mostly kind, then when you do face somebody who's negative, you'll look at them as an outlier as opposed to looking at them as the norm. And your brain's going to also look for all the things, like in the first example, the twin didn't even notice the guy, didn't even
Right.
register that somebody had helped her. She was so focused on the negative. So that plasticity really is built through intention and repetition and positivity.
That's powerful. Which brings me to the idea of repetition. How does repetition shape habits and behaviors? For example, now you've talked about neuroplasticity and you've seen you compare those two twins. I learned something from a book that I'm currently reading about the brain, and the book was titled, was it The Mind That Shapes Itself? And it's saying something like when you repeat some things, your sense organs, when you sense things and feel things, there are certain neurons that are firing together. And these neurons are firing together, forming a pathway. And the more they continue that way, they build patterns. And this pattern solidified and becomes like a concrete neuron structure in your system. And so every time when you feel a certain way, those patterns want to flow in sequences again, which in turn leads to that automatic habit of you just doing certain things you
Yeah.
don't even understand and why you're doing it. Because you've hardwired your mind, your brain to follow certain way in order to respond to certain situation. So how does consistency tie into these things, into hardwiring our mind to be a certain way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And your brain is looking, your brain doesn't want to work harder than it has to work. So it's going to look for places it can just have automaticity.
Mhm.
And so I explain the brain kind of like a giant highway. So when you're born, you've got this huge field of grass and you decide, so you start to do these neural pathways and you start to tamp down the grass. So you start to build like an exit ramp. And so like for example with babies, they learn how to like pull their lips away from their gums and they smile and everybody goes nuts and coos and gives them positive reinforcement. So
Right,
they are like, I like how that feels. So over many, many times they learn when I want attention, I just pull my lips away and everybody goes crazy. And they learn the power of a smile. That repetition basically tamps down the grass and turns it into a really nice dirt path and eventually a paved highway. And it just becomes automatic. We
right,
have a lot of bad automatic habits. Like some people might say, when I'm stressed, I eat, or when I'm stressed, I drink, or when I feel threatened, I get aggressive or yell at people. And those different highway ramps are not just built by our own experiences, but they're built through vicarious experiences. So I look at my parents, I look at the people around me in my community, and how do they respond to things. And so I'm watching over and over again, and I call them when then statements. When this happens, then this is what you do.
right,
And then you eventually create the exit ramp. What's difficult is that when you want to change your habit, you have to pave a different exit ramp and you're starting in grass again sometimes. And so if you think of the highway analogy, say you're driving down the highway and you have to go to the bathroom. And so you get off at an exit, and every time you get off, you end up getting mugged. It's a terrible area of town. So you know that you shouldn't go there, but you always have to go to the bathroom right there. So once you recognize that, you say, okay, I'm going to go down to the next exit but here's the key. I have to stay in discomfort because I have to go to the bathroom and I have to hold it until I can get to a safe place.
right,
So first thing is recognizing that that pattern is taking you to somewhere you don't want to be.
right,
The second is having some awareness of where do I go instead? I have to know where the safe exit is. And we assume sometimes that people do. Like that would be like you and me saying, let's get healthy. We're not going to go to the Mexican restaurant and drink margaritas and eat 4 bags of chips every Wednesday. Let's instead go to Golden Corral. Like that's not a good choice. Like that, so we have to know where that other exit is.
mhm,
And then we have to have the persistence and tenacity to pave that. And what I see a lot of times with people who are trying to change habits, we're going to fall off the wagon at some point, right? It's the comfortable exit. And when you think about changing a habit, it takes energy. It takes energy in your brain
right.
and energy in your body to pave that new exit. So sometimes when you're tired or you've just had enough, you're just like, "Ugh, I'm not doing that today. I'm just going to go to the comfort, the exit that's paved that takes no energy whatsoever, even when it ends up costing you more and isn't a good decision." So the key is when we fall off the wagon, like if you and I, we're going to end up at that Mexican restaurant again and we're going to, have fun. But the key is, what do we say to ourselves? Do we say, that was fun, but we got to get back on the horse and get back to what we're doing? Or do we say, and this is what I see a lot of people say, we were never meant to be healthy eaters. This is just who we are. And so then we go back to our habits.
Reinforce
And
the
so
mind again.
yes. And so there's a lot of sort of shame and negative self-talk that keeps us going on those exits. And I feel like when you understand the mechanics of this, there's no guilt, there's no shame. It's just a habit that you have that you need to break. And so how can we set up a system that will give you the support and the recognition and the celebration to put the extra effort in to pave that new ramp? And and that's where positivity comes in. If I'm trying to say lose weight and I lose 20 pounds and not one person says, "Hey, have you lost weight? You look great." It can be, I just don't have the energy to continue with it because I'm like, what's the point of this?
Really,
Nobody's
right.
trying. So as you're working with a friend who wants to change a habit, or if you're at a work and you want to change habits, or you're working with kids in schools, any of that, that positivity and focusing on the efforts and the work that they're doing to pave that new exit can give them the bump they need in order to be able to persist.
That's powerful. And what I just and understood from your illustration is the brain is a lazy entity, doesn't
Yeah.
like to work. It
No.
likes to convey, it likes to conceive energy and thinking, doing cognitive tasks consumes large amount of energy in your system by your brain compared to doing physical work. I read
Mhm.
this somewhere. And if there was a better way to get this task done without consuming much energy, which is the part of efficiency, it's very easy for the brain to just say, all right, this costs less energy. I'm going to go this part. And so
Exactly.
you trying to redirect your actions means you're then taxing the brain to expend more energy than it would usually do compared to when it just followed the already paved highway analogy that you made. And so when we repeat these actions, it becomes a concreted mindset that is in our mind. And so anytime you want to do certain stuff, the brain says, oh, there is a way to get that done easily. I don't need to go the extra mile. And then it defaults into it. For you to then change that habit, you need to create another highway. And that
Mhm.
would obviously require intentionality. And one of the key things you mentioned that spiked me is systems. Most times people like to depend on willpower, but then you would realize, I watched something one time and it says a drop of water on a rock will make a dented hole over time compared to one burst of water on that rock. If you
Yep.
shell high pressure of water on that rock, probably would not do anything. But if you keep dropping a droplet of water every day, over time you will see that it will begin to eat up the rock and then begin to form a hole in the shape of
Yep.
the volume of the water that have been dropping on it over time. So that's just kind of like the brain too. Consistency. You might not succeed in trying to break that neural pathway and form a new one by just a burst of intensity, but
Right.
ability to keep reinforcing yourself. When you go towards the wrong path, you remind yourself that, okay, this is not the right way to go. This is the other way. This is the right way to go. And you keep making those steps every day consistently. It's like you are rewiring your brain, you're creating those neurons, those new neurological pathway, and then until it becomes strong and powerful enough to debug the other one and then become the new default of your mind. That is what I got from what you said.
Right. And I love that analogy, the water. I'm going to steal that from you if you don't mind.
That's all.
But I love that because, the other piece is once first of all, you can't sprint to habit change. It has to be consistent over time until it's automatic. And the other thing that's nice is when you are doing that, when it's automatic, the other exit ramp starts to get overgrown because it's not being tended.
Right.
So eventually, doing your old habit takes more energy than doing the new habit, but it takes time to do that. And so then you think about like all behavior is the intersection between our biology and our context. And so we've talked a little bit about the biology, and then, how do you change your brain? How do you change the context? And the context then will start to build those new habits. But the other problem that people run into is that the devil's in what I know. So sometimes it's like, well, I know I should do this new habit, but when we have the unknown, anxiety is the product of not knowing
Right.
and wondering and worrying about things. So that's the other obstacle we face is that we know we need to build a new exit ramp. We know we need to adopt a new habit, but that's scary. So then our brain goes, well, wait a minute, I don't know what you're doing. We need to ramp up our stress system because we're in the unsure zone. We don't know if we're in danger or not. And so that's another barrier that we have to overcome is to learn how to regulate our body and say, no, we're fine and we're going to do this and it's going to be great and positive self-talk versus dread.
That's powerful. And that right there you said just points to the power of words
Yep.
and how they shape your mind and perception and everything. If you could, on a much more practical sense, how does words and statements influence and change the topic that we're talking about now?
How do words?
How does words influence everything about the old minds and neuroscience and all of those things? How does the words we utter from our mouth on a practical sense affect all of this.
Yeah. So the words that we tell our brain, again, the job of the CEO up here is not to do the jobs of the brain,
Right.
but to understand what they do and then to build their capacity to do it the way that we want. So we get to be in control. And so those words become filters. They become mantras that, if you have maxims, like you think of like you get more honey, um, what is it, the maxim about you get more bees with honey or something, or or like treats versus sticks kind of thing. Those become like maxims and things we know. Those are win then pathways in our brain. And those win then pathways are started by words and recognition. So we might be doing something and have a reaction to it, but if we never process it and put it into words and concepts, if we just live in the emotional state of how we're feeling, then we can't influence those filters the same way, because then at that point we truly are running on the limbic brain. It's all just unconscious emotion. So words are really important. And that's why, I know it sounds hokey sometimes, but doing affirmations and say them out loud, because if your brain thinks them, hears them, your lips are making those words, it is a stronger message to your limbic brain than if you just let it kind of think about it for a minute and then let it go. So
Right.
affirmations are really important. The other thing that's really important is writing and saying, write down in a gratitude journal, find something positive that happened every day. When my kids were young, they're 20 and 23 now, but when they were young, I used to ask them at dinner time every night, tell me two good things that happened today. And they couldn't. And it was really alarming to me. And they would say things like, well, I didn't get in a fight. And I'm like, that's not good. That's the absence of bad, right?
Right.
So they had to train their brain. And so what happened was they knew the expectation at dinner would be I would ask that question. So their thalamus, their brain that day said, I better pay attention to the nice guy who helped me pick up my coffee, or I better pay attention for acts of altruism or kindness in my environment because I'm going to have to report on them, as opposed to just confirming a negative bias. And so words, words form concepts and meaning, and that's how our brain starts to understand how it's functioning.
Dopamine. What does dopamine have to do in all this?
Oh, dopamine's huge. So dopamine is the chemical that's released when we feel good. And so and dopamine right now, that's how social media gets everybody addicted,
Right.
is that there's multiple hits of dopamine. And the problem we have right now with social media is that I can do nothing and get a lot of dopamine. So there's a huge return on investment. I can change my profile picture to a ribbon of some, cancer or whatever. I can, some cause, and I can get 4,000 likes. Every like is a little dopamine hit, right?
Mhm.
If I'm in real space in brick and mortar buildings with human beings and somebody falls down and I help them up and they say thank you, or if somebody says something nice to me, I only get one.
Right.
So we have a real problem with the online version of ourselves and the real version of ourselves. And this is where context becomes so important. So if you're running a company or in your home, positivity, like being celebratory, saying, hey, that was really nice. Thank you so much. Being intentional about giving people positive feedback so that they're getting dopamine hits all day long in this environment, as opposed to a negative environment. And then they go home and all they have to do is something silly that they didn't really do, and they can virtue signal and get a million hits.
That's powerful. Dopamine is that feeling whereby, because I made a study one time into the nature of humans. And why is it that we go every day, go out, all for one purpose, survival? And that is what the primates of the old times have always done, always about survival. And I read a book that says dopamine is actually what ensures the survival and the continuity of the human race, because it is that neuron, it's that chemical, that hormone that get us to actually get up, that fires us up. It's kind of like the source of that adrenaline rush in our body that gets us to do stuff. And so the modern form of dopamine makes you feel good. Every wants to feel accepted, wants to feel happy, wants to feel fulfilled, wants to feel that sense of joy. But the problem with dopamine is that it is only a burst. And once you get that burst, it fades away. And then all that old feelings of feeling like crap, whatever it is that you're feeling, it comes back. And then hence the reason why no matter how much you buy, you think you're gonna get happy, but you don't eventually do. You think, oh, if I take that vacation, it's gonna change everything. But then vacation comes. And then once the vacation comes, you realize that even the excitement that you had before it came, it's no longer sustained when the vacation is now here. You don't really feel that much pumped about it anymore. Why is it that way?
That's just the way that those neurotransmitters are designed. So the purpose of a neurotransmitter is, you have two nerve endings, and when you have to send a signal from one to the other,
Right.
one nerve ending will excrete some type of a transmitter to help the message jump across, and then it pulls it back up. And we have 4 or 5 major neurotransmitters in our brain that we use, and dopamine's a very fast one. And so when the message has gone across, the I feel great message,
Right.
it gets sucked back into the neuron really quick. So it's a quick hit, but it's a happy hit. And so that's where that consistency piece comes in again, right? So if you schedule your life where you spend, and I've actually worked with some people, I do a little bit of life coaching, and I set them up with a self-care routine. And one of the things we do at the beginning is set your alarm for 90 minutes.
Mhm.
And even, I mean, if you're willing to, even less than that, maybe every 30 minutes. As soon as the alarm goes off, sit down, close your eyes, and think a positive thought. Think of something you're grateful for, think of whatever, and you'll get that little dopamine hit. You can also do breathing exercises, and you can do, things that will relax your body so I'll have them set up a timer, and then, they say something or think something or write something, jot it down that's positive, and then they relax their body a little bit. And then at the end of the day, they can look at all those things that they jotted down, and they can say, I had a great day. And then they're filled again with happiness and fulfillment. But again, we have to train our brain because we are wired to look for the bad things because survival says you better be paying attention. If something's
Right.
shady, we need to know that you're in danger. So we have to train our brain to say, no, we're not in danger. We're going to be okay.
So now, how does all this tie to leadership, people-centered leadership?
Yeah. So my doctoral work was on leadership, and I really focused on the human side. And I started looking at a lot of the social theories like motivation theory and hope theory and, engagement theories and things. And then I started realizing, all this change is actually happening in the biology. It's in your brain. So when I look at leaders, just a few things that, like, when we're trying to make people change, they have fear because change is scary, and
Right.
we don't attend to that fear. And so we don't attend to the reasons people resist out of fear. We think they just will say things like, well, they just don't want to be on the team, or they're just not willing to do it, or they're lazy, or whatever. It's actually not that. It's that they're scared. And when you're scared, that limbic system of your brain, depending on how scared you are, either sends this one out for a cup of coffee or is in hyper alert mode. So from a leader perspective, I think understanding, like, who are your able and willing, who are your able but not willing, and why. Who are your not able and willing? Those are easy. You just train them. Who are your not able and not willing? And what is the root cause of that? So that's one area. And then the other area with leadership is we leaders deal with conflict all day long.
Right.
If you understand the brain, you can diagnose the problem differently. So say, for example, you and I are working together and you give a lot of constructive feedback. You like to get feedback yourself. You think that we're in a relationship where you can just give feedback. I am a person who the filters in my brain, I came from a highly critical family. I'm very perfectionist, hard on myself, whatever. I'm perceiving your criticism as you're just constantly needling me. So I go to our manager and I say, he is just constantly bothering me, and he's disrespectful, and he's always criticizing my work and blah, blah, blah. If the leader understands the the way we create perceptions, he's going to reframe the why are you upset about this differently. And I see a lot of times, normally they would bring you and me in and we'd have a conversation about
Right.
the what, right? But if you understand the brain science, you can dig in a little bit. Like my manager could say to me, do you think he meant it that way? Why did you perceive it that way? Could he have been I know that he really thrives in feedback. So he might be giving you feedback. Is there a different reality that you're not seeing? And getting them to kind of open their mind to the way I perceive this may not look, it's the banana. It's a smashed banana. It doesn't look anything like the banana. And
Right.
so and that kind of recognition and approach can generate real healing between you and me because it's not about that event. It's really about the underlying cause of my fear. And then at that point, if you understand that about me, you might be gentler about how you give me feedback, or you might ask if I want feedback ahead of time. And so we've gotten to the root problem as opposed to just solving whatever the project was on that you gave me some
Right.
feedback.
That's powerful. So, Lisa, if there's one last gem you could leave with Proverbial Minds audience, what would it be?
I think that the key to being happier, healthier, and more successful is to first understand that your behavior is your biology and your context. And so if you understand your brain, and you can train your brain, if you can develop self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-control, you're going to be more productive, happier, you're going to see the good in the world, you're going to be more fulfilled. And so my mission really is to help people understand there's nothing wrong with you, right? Your CEO is just maybe not leading the departments of the brain in the way that you want them to lead. So let's train your CEO of your brain, and then your brain's going to work for you instead of the other way around.
Awesome. Thank you for your time, Lisa.
Yeah,
So,
thank you so much.
Proverbial Minds audience, this is it on rewiring the mind, how you can use your brain science to become a better leader, better parent, whatever it is, and even a better leader of your own personal life and your own personal self. It all starts in the brain. The neurons firing together to form habits and patterns and perceptions on how you interpret things. What you see most times is not what it is. It's your interpretation of what it is. And that interpretation is a formation of experiences and senses, activities that you have over time developed or experienced in your life, which has formed neural pathways and structures in your brain and mind such that they interpret everything you see through that lens, even though that might not be the truth. So the first way to reshape your life is to reshape that perceptions. And remember, a burst of water does not make a dent in the stone, but a droplet of water every day is what creates the whole. So you will not get there overnight. You will not transform your life in one day. Single steps every day is what leads to transformation. So let that stick with you and let it bless you. Again, if you're here for the first time, do not hesitate to subscribe and hit the notification button. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram. The name is at Proverbial Minds. And until the next one, stay blessed.